Welcome to the workshop for finding and evaluating sources. Now that we have a topic and a research question, we want to spend some time looking at and understanding how to best both find and select the resources that we want to use for the evidence in our paper. So after completing this workshop, you should be able to identify the difference between popular and scholarly sources, identify strategies for finding those sources, describe examples of popular and scholarly sources, determine the credibility of a source. So let's talk about the two different types of articles that we may encounter when we research at different times. You see in this table I have listed popular articles and scholarly articles. Most of the sources that you'll use for this particular piece are going to be under the lens of or the category of popular articles. And really the main differences are going to include things like the audience for whom the article has been written, the language that the article uses, the content of the article, and who it's recommended for. We're going to probably stay in the popular articles for this particular piece. And as you notice, the audience for the popular articles include the general public. If you move down and you see who they're recommended for, typically somebody who is trying to find out ideas, learn the basics, or different perspectives for a particular topic. Typically, popular articles tend to be a little bit shorter, and they use language that is a little more accessible for a general public audience. The content of popular articles usually gives a broad overview of issues of interest to the general public, but it also does provide evidence to support the argument or assertion in the article. Usually in popular articles, you will not see a work cited or full citations given. For example, if you look at a newspaper article, let's say in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, you'll notice at the end they will not have the sources listed in some kind of format, APA, MLA, where you would have a works cited page. However, in those articles, they do provide the evidence to support the argument or assertion in that article. Now you'll notice there's a little bit of a difference on the scholarly article side. Scholarly articles are typically written for other scholars or professionals in a particular field of study. They tend to be very lengthy, and they tend to use the professional language or academic language of the field at hand. They usually cover a narrow topic related to a specific field, and you'll always find the works cited or bibliography at the end of the article that will list in some kind of format, be it MLA or APA, the sources that were used in the article. Most of the time, it's recommended for academic work, professional development, learning about new research being conducted in a particular field. Now, you'll encounter both types of sources throughout your college and professional career. However, in many cases, particularly in what we are going to be focusing on, most of the sources that you will probably end up choosing will fall under that popular articles side. So the next thing we want to think about is where can we look for sources? So there's a lot of different places you can look. What we want to do is we're going to narrow it just a bit because as you can see, there's a lot of different places you can look. General reference works such as encyclopedias, bibliographies, abstracts, specialized reference works, books, periodical articles, which include those scholarly journals that we were just talking about, newspapers, magazines, different articles on the internet. You'll have specialized databases, websites, virtual communities, government documents, primary sources. The list goes on and on. Most of our work for this particular project will focus in on those periodical articles, which would include newspapers, magazines, and perhaps some different sources from the internet. So the first thing we want to talk about are the library databases. And let's review why we would use them. First, the library databases contain a large amount of research that is free to you through the library. So you have access to it all the time, and you can feel secure that the resources and sources that you find on that are credible. They contain a large amount of research written by professionals. The authorship and publication information is clear, along with the citation information that you will need for your works cited. Databases allow you to more easily narrow and refine your searches. And did I mention that it is a lot of information for free to you to use through the library? So one of the questions is always, how do you choose a database? Because there are many, many, many different databases. One of the things we want to know is what's in the database. Not all databases are the same. Not all databases cover the same dates for the same fields. So it's important to understand the subject areas that a database covers. What date range or ranges does it cover? What types of material does it include, such as magazine, newspaper, books, book chapters, statistical data, images, audio, video? So it's important really to understand these three things: the subject area, the date ranges, and the types of material that it covers. That will help you narrow. You'll go from seeing lots and lots of databases to begin to narrow to a particular databases, or even 2 to 3 different databases that you might target to find your search. So how do you get started? Searching for articles in a library databases is different than searching with Google. One thing is, we need to remember to be precise. Databases are literal, meaning they're only going to search for the words you typed in the search. So for example, in Google, you might type a question, what is the definition of database? And Google is going to produce a lot of different hits that will begin to perhaps define that word for you. If you were to put that same question in a database search, you would get the hit on every article that has every single word in that question, which would be absolutely overwhelming. And this is why we start thinking about key terms for our searches. Be persistent. Sometimes when you begin to search, you'll come up with great results on the first try, but often it takes several modifications before you get the articles you need. So be patient with yourself and be patient with the searches. It's important to make sure that you find the most effective sources for your topic and for your research in order to most effectively provide the evidence that you need, not only to make a claim about your topic, but also to provide the evidence. So finding your sources and searching for those sources is extremely important. So let's think about some tips and tricks for searching in the databases. Many times you might enter in a key term and you'll see that you get way too many hits than you are ready to go through. So one thing you can do is think about narrowing your search. So in other words, choose an additional keyword, perhaps one that more narrowly focuses what you're looking for. So instead of putting in law, you might put in environmental law. And what that will do is narrow that search so the articles that are being brought forward have to do with specifically environmental law. You can use limiters, such as if you're looking for a specific title, you might know of an author that you're specifically looking for, or a publication date, or even a format type. For example, you may only want magazine articles, or you may only want newspaper articles. So you can start using limiters to help narrow that focus. You can also search for short phrases within quotation marks. For example, environmental law or environmental justice. And that way, when the search database searches, it's going to look for those two words together because it's going to assume you want that focus together. In order to better narrow, or in some cases broaden your search, you can use what are called Boolean operators. Most library databases do use these, and they include three terms: and, or, and not. You can use them to broaden or narrow your search. For example, placing and as a Boolean operator searches for records that use both terms and narrows your results. So for example, environmental and law. They're only going to produce the results that have those things together, thereby narrowing your search. Doing the same thing but using the Boolean operator or is going to broaden your results. So in other words, environmental or law. So that's going to open it up to both terms. If you use the Boolean operator not, it's going to exclude words from the search and thereby narrowing your search. For example, environmental, not law, it's going to narrow the search for environmental but not law. So let's talk about websites for a minute, because we all want to use websites in order to find information, because typically it's an easier way to find information. However, we have to be really careful with the credibility of the websites that we choose. So when we think about the websites or internet, there's a lot of different ways in which, or things that we encounter. One of those is Wikipedia. We've all heard of Wikipedia, we've read Wikipedia. It's typically one of the first entries on a Google search. Wikipedia is not something we would ever put on our works cited. It is not a source that we could use. However, when we are trying to become familiar with a topic, Wikipedia can provide a good starting place for the research. However, make sure you evaluate the content critically. While they do have an editing process for Wikipedia, and it has gotten better over time, you do want to make sure that anything that you might look at with regards to the citations on a Wikipedia page are credible. So again, Wikipedia could be used to get just a broad sense of a particular topic, but it is not something that you would use on a works cited page, or something that you would quote or even paraphrase in your essay. You also notice that we have those general search engines such as Google, Bing, Yahoo, or Ask. We're all familiar with these. We Google things constantly, but again, the big issue is making sure that we find credible sources, which is something we're going to focus on more specifically in just a minute. You also have different websites that are developed through national organizations or governmental organizations. Typically, we see those as .gov. We also think of those as being not only updated regularly, but typically credible and current. You have things like meta search engines, and these sites will search several different search engines at once. These are things like Dogpile.com, the Library of Congress, Metacrawler, and WebCrawler. If you haven't had an opportunity to kind of experiment with these, now would be a good time to just kind of play with those just a little bit. And then finally, we have things that are mediated search engines. And these sites have been assembled and reviewed by people who sometimes provide annotations and commentary about a topic and specific sites. So these are things like about.com. So how do we evaluate for authority on particular sources? How do we know if we found a website that is credible? One thing we can do is we can look at the URL. And not to say that this is the end all to be all, but it certainly moves us in a direction. For example, those websites that are .com, .net, or .org, let's talk about those first. .com are commercial sites. Anybody can purchase that website, use that website, which means that we've got to go deeper into the website to make sure that it's credible. Same thing with net. .net, network access provider, which means that someone can purchase access to use that web address. So we've got to evaluate it a little bit further. .org are typically nonprofit organizations. And the one thing we want to recognize with that is that most of the time, those nonprofit organizations are advocating for and or against something, which means that we've got to look at it through the lens of understanding the bias of the organization and what their purpose or focus is. When we get to edu and .gov, edu are educational institutions and .gov are government or department agents. And we typically think of these as being credible and things that we can use fairly comfortably. Of course, making sure with all of these that you're critically engaging with the information to make sure that it achieves or has something that will be useful to your research project or topic. So let's think about how we might evaluate our sources, specifically from a web source perspective. And that's something that we call taking the CRAP test. Yes, the acronym CRAAP. The first one being currency. And this is when you're looking to see how recent or when the information was published or posted. How often or when has the information been revised or updated? And are the links on the website functional? Meaning if you click on something, does it take you where it says it will? Or are there broken links? So there's a flag right there. The next one is relevance. Does the information on the website relate to your topic or answer your question? Who's the intended audience for the website? Is the information at an appropriate level? Meaning, are you able to take that information and discuss it thoroughly with your audience? The next one is authority. You have to look at who is the author, the publisher, the source, the sponsor of that particular website. What's the author's qualifications to write on the topic? In other words, you're establishing their credibility or their ethos, right? Does the URL reveal anything about the author or the source? For example, is it a blog? It'll say blog in the URL. Now, there's nothing wrong with blogs. Blogs are fabulous. But if you're looking for a particular article that will provide specific evidence, factual evidence, you've got to be leery of a blog because typically they are written for an audience of an opinion. The next one is accuracy. Is the information supported by evidence? This is really, really important. Can you verify any of the information in another source? Does the language or tone seem biased and free of emotion? So again, if you go to a .org, it's typically a nonprofit organization that has been designed or been developed for a reason to advocate something. So it's going to be important just to understand what that is and recognize the bias and make sure you're navigating that as you begin to collect and synthesize the evidence to support your research question. And then finally, purpose. What is the purpose of the information? Do the authors, sponsors make their intentions or purpose clear? Is the information fact, opinion? Is it propaganda? Keeping these things in mind will help you evaluate those web sources that I know we all want to use. But it's going to be important that you take the time and really investigate the source to make sure that it does provide you with the necessary information for your topic. So, how do you decide if a source is worthy of your paper? In order to choose sources, just keep in mind that you want to be patient and persistent and determined. So if you're looking to collect 4 sources for a paper, you're probably going to be skimming through and otherwise engaging with upwards of triple that in order to narrow it to the most effective 4. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Is the article credible based on the criteria we just discussed in this video? What is the article's central point or assertion regarding the topic? What is the evidence that the article uses to support its central point? And what does the article do for your topic and your research question? These are 4 really good questions to have kind of near you as you are engaging with a particular article. To highlight, annotate, and then move some of those notes over in order to most effectively find and choose the sources for your research topic. Thank you so much for engaging in this workshop video. You will now return to Canvas and continue with the assignment. Please refer back to this video at any time when you have questions about this workshop, or if you need to come back into it with your notes and collect more resources or information before moving forward to our next step. Thank you.